Everybody, welcome back to the channel. And if you are tuned into this right now, that means you are tuned in to the Dr. Pearlman podcast, and this is episode 13. Our featured guest today is Kevin Kuhn. He is an exercise therapist, a rehab specialist, a running coach, a trainer, a kinesiologist, and an author of not only Hormonal Nutrition, but also The Self-Reliant Diet. Both of these books I have below in the links in the descriptions. Whether you're seeing this on YouTube, listening on Spotify or Apple, any platform that you're listening to a clip from this podcast, you're sure to be getting a lot of good, informative, and educational information. He's also a high-level running coach. He has a great history in athletics and sport performance, and he really gives a ton of insight, which he does all the time on his channel, which is Athlete Factors, one word, and you should all check out the Athlete Factors podcast, which is over 100 episodes in, because he has on unbelievably dynamic guests of clinical pearls and relevance, which I think we all can agree that we would like to have those clinical pearls and wisdom in the best way to stay healthy, rehab ourselves so that we're not spending a ton of time in the clinic. The first hour of this podcast really focuses in emphasis on self-care, self-maintenance, self-rehabilitation, running gait, running mechanics, and how to optimize performance, whether you are an elite level athlete or just a recreational, a few miles a week type runner. The last part of the podcast really focuses on nutrition, getting into the crux of what his books are about and how they can help you, whether it be body composition or athletic performance. And we talk about fat adaptation versus ketosis and whether or not that's a real thing when it comes to sports performance and whether or not that's something you should consider. So without further ado, everybody, this is me and Athlete Factors, Kevin Kuhn. We are recording. This is the Dr. Pearlman podcast, and in-house today is my good friend and fellow Richardson, Texas healer, Kevin Kuhn.
What's up?
All right. So Kevin, recently I was on your podcast. And it was a delight. Thank you for letting me speak on your platform and talk about Gonstead Chiropractic and all things health and wellness in general. Now, one of the things I have to go, my audience will want to know, because I think about this all the time. Are you actually Matthew Fox?
Only on the weekends.
Only on the weekends.
That's right. I've been told I look like him a few times, so it's not completely a new thing, but right. I don't see it, to be honest with you.
I mean, maybe not Party of Five, Matthew Fox, but certainly a little bit of Lost / I don't remember the name of the movie that you were in with Forrest Whitaker.
I don't remember it either.
Yeah, and then he recently, even in like the mid-2000s, he had this role where he was like an MMA fighter. And I'm like, then I saw you, I was like, man, that's you.
I'm definitely not an MMA fighter. We had to use a body double for that one.
Gotcha. It's like he faked his own death. Maybe they recorded it. You come back and this, your name is strange. Anyways, what your last name, Kuhn? Like
it's German.
German.
Mm-hmm.
Is like everybody from your family just straight 100% German?
On my dad's side, I think so. My mom's side is Irish and English, I believe.
Okay.
So Selden and McLaughlin. On the mom's side, yeah.
Would I be right to say that's a nice Irish name?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. At least I get that part.
Very Irish.
Yeah, no, my grandfather, he's from Germany. Lemberger.
That's a legit name, man.
Yeah. So that's like, part of me, wants to root still for the Germans in the World Cup. But, it's a lot easier rooting for the Germans than it is the United States. You might just get there sometimes.
That's true.
But let's do this. Let's maybe briefly, if you want to tell the long version, that's fine too. Tell us about your background and how you became the kinesiologist, author of Hormonal Nutrition. Everyone, let me put my phone out of the way here. Hormonal Nutrition and The Self-Reliant Diet.
Yes, sir.
And offering pearls of wisdom day in and day out on not only your social media feed, but to all the runners that we're lucky to interact with over there in the neighborhood.
Yes, sir.
And beyond.
So, long or short? Let's see. So, I'll try to be brief about like my ancient history, and then we'll speed things up as we go, I guess. So, I'm originally from Ohio. My parents were missionaries, so when I was 6, they packed us all up and we moved to the Philippines, and I lived there for 3 years. Then we came back to the US for a year, and then we spent another 4 years there. So a total of 7 years. Came back to the US right before I started high school. Went to a really, really tiny high school called Cedarville High School, and then crossed the street and went to Cedarville University, like literally right across the street, and studied ex-phys there. I wanted to be a running coach. That's all I wanted to do, just work with pro runners. And my junior year, injured my back and had a little bit of a tough time trying to fix it. And I kind of started to understand that, I probably need to know a little bit about injuries if I'm going to work with athletes, because athletes will get injured at some point. So came down to Dallas in the summer of 2008 to do an internship at the Cooper Aerobic Center. Loved it. Decided to go visit Baylor. Was like, oh my goodness, I have to go to grad school here. And so I studied ex-phys with an emphasis in strength and conditioning for my master's degree. And then from there moved to Indianapolis to work as a strength coach and nutrition coach for the Indiana Invaders Professional Running Club, where I was working with underdogs trying to make, a U.S. championship or world championship, an Olympic team, things like that. So did that for a year and a half, and then I was like, man, this weather in the Midwest really sucks. So had to get away from those harsh winters and came back to Dallas, and I've been here since 2012. So, okay. And then worked with my mentor, Ambrose Coleman, really up until the pandemic started, going up to his facility, and I'd help him run youth athletic development programs up there, working with middle school athletes, really elementary, middle school, high school, and even collegiate athletes, as well as their adult clients up there. And then started Athlete Factors really in 2019. And that's my kinesiology and sport nutrition coaching practice here in Dallas. So.
Okay. Well, and the part that stuck out to me the most in that was that in the Philippines, I think of the jungle, and I think of you in Lost, in the jungle acting, and then of course it fits the timeline. So, guys, he might be actually Matthew Fox. I might end up changing the name of the show. But
believe it or not, I actually did act in a Filipino movie.
No way, really?
Dead serious. Yeah.
What was your role? What'd you do?
I was a bully, and I got to have a mud fight with the main character. Wow. And but then there was, resolution at the end, and it's basically like the Filipino version of the story Little Lord Fauntleroy, where like there's this orphan kid and he's actually like royalty, but he doesn't know it, and then they find him, and then happy ending.
Okay.
So,
did you want to be an actor at some point?
No, but I got paid, which is pretty cool. So.
That is cool. All right. So let's talk about a little Athletes Factors, working with athletes, working with runners, working on the nutrition component. What would you say your specialty is?
My specialty, when it comes to athletes, like my background is primarily with endurance athletes, and specifically with runners. I ran high school cross country and track. Did pretty well in high school, well enough to get a little scholarship money and run in college. So got to do that. So my goal has always been to work with runners specifically. So I think my specialty is with endurance athletes in general, but anything that overlaps with running. So triathlon, runners, like marathon, ultras, anything to do with running, even sprinting. If you get there on 2 feet, like that's me.
Gotcha.
So,
well, I don't want to say what are the most common injuries of running, but one thing that's just sticking out, and I might be going a little bit off script here, and if I need to be reeled back in, you just tell me. I think a lot about people's gait, like even just watching them run, like back when I was a CrossFit coach, back when I was a personal trainer, and even now as a chiropractor, I guess every now and again, when I think it's warranted, I certainly will watch someone's gait. And I think the spectrum, right, of like the gait analysis and how people just move so different. Is that a big deal? I mean, I would imagine it's a big deal when it comes to like running efficiency. I think that's something I want to know more. So please fill me in on that, because there are people that like they're running and it's just like a mess. Can't be good for their knees, can't be good for their ankles, can't be good for their feet.
Sure.
Is it a brain thing? Is it a body mechanic thing? I mean, how much success do you have fixing that? What's that like?
So early on, like when I was in college, the guys cross country coach or the guys distance coach and the women's distance coach, like not a whole lot of like overlap in with regards to their coaching philosophy, let's say. And the women's coach, Dr. King, or Coach King, he had a ton of success with the women's program, and he got to the point where he was like, I'm not going to try to change any of my runners' form. Like, he was just like, if you're a heel striker or a midfoot striker, I don't care. I'm not going to change it. If I try to change it, I end up making you slower. So that was kind of my exposure to like that idea. And then I had a biomechanics class with him where he was like, here's ideal running form. And I'm like, okay, so what's going on? If there's an ideal way to run, but you're not trying to get your athletes to run that way, then what's going on? That was really confusing for me. So the more that I study human gait and the more I study or just watch my athletes run and the more I run, the more I have started to understand that, like, and the more that research has come out. So I just had a PhD on my podcast not too long ago. Her name's Kate Harrison, and she's a biomechanist, and along with her, and then another runner, Shalea Kipp, who's finishing up her PhD. Like, Shalea Kipp represented the U.S. in the 2012 Olympics in the steeplechase, and she's like, yeah, I'm a heel striker. And I'm like, that really, really blew my mind. I couldn't believe that someone at that high of a caliber of runner is like talking about, yeah, I'm a heel striker. It's not that big a deal. And then listening to Kate Harrison talk about, yeah, if you heel strike or if you midfoot strike, there's really not that much of a difference when it comes to the number of injuries that a person will experience, but the type of injuries tend to be different, right? So if you're a heel striker, you're probably loading more hard tissues. Like, you're going to have more bone injuries. You're going to have more joint issues. If you're a midfoot striker or ball of the foot striker, in other words, if you're not landing on your heels, you're probably going to have more soft tissue issues. So it really comes down to not so much whether you're landing on your heel or landing on your midfoot, but where you land relative to your center of mass. Like, how far in front of you are you landing? If you're landing way out in front, you're going to have a ton of issues. That's like hitting the brakes and the gas pedal at the same time. Like, your car's just, it's going to get messed up. So if you are landing on your heel or if you are landing on your midfoot, whatever the case may be, landing as close to your center of gravity or center of mass as possible is probably going to reduce the amount of braking force that you have to then overcome and absorb. And that's like stress that your body has to handle, that, like the shocks on your car. So the more you are underneath you, the more you can translate that into an accelerating force or a propelling force or a maintaining force to keep you running, right? So that's just going to be less wear and tear, whether that force is getting absorbed, through the bones or through more of the soft tissues, tendons, ligaments, tendons, muscle, etc. So the other thing, when it comes to gait, like, we like to essentially break things down into quadrants. We talk about front side mechanics, back side mechanics, top side mechanics, and bottom side mechanics. So if we're looking at front side mechanics, ideally, and like even here, there's a lot of there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of people who are gaining more popularity just because when you look at a picture of, let's say, Usain Bolt or a top-level sprinter, if you take a screenshot, then you're like, oh my goodness, his front side mechanics, his leg makes the perfect letter Z, where his knee's up, his heel is up underneath him, his toes are dorsiflex, or his ankles dorsiflex. Like, that's beautiful. So like, we want to reinforce this Z position as much as possible. That compresses your leg, turns it into a spring, and then when you make contact with the ground, you come out of that Z, like boom, you're like, it's like popping off the ground. But when you look at those same mechanics in slow motion, like there's a lot of medial and lateral movement. Like if you're just looking at things from the side, then yeah, it just looks like a Z. But there's now a lot of research showing like you get a lot more propulsion, you get a lot more acceleration if you're not just working on this like perfect front to back, get into a Z, get out of a Z sort of running mechanics that we tend to like water it down and try to teach kids, especially like, oh, just create this letter Z and then you push off, into the ground and that's how you get faster. Well, yeah, that's true, but there's also the fact that the bodies work in 3 dimensions. And so if you're only looking at things from a side view, let's say, and you're just looking at sagittal plane mechanics where they're working up into a Z and then pushing, but you're forgetting like, yeah, I got to get on the front side so I can, from the front, watch this person run so I can see their frontal plane mechanics and see how their hips shift and the knees move. And there's actually maybe a little bit of a circular pattern with the knees and the ankles as you're going up in and out of a Z.
That actually just has been sticking out in my mind, that circular pattern. Especially people, if I'm not going to just say overpronate, but like how that knee will go valgus a little bit, right? And in particular, women really suffer with this. And I think that's, am I catching on what you were kind of throwing out there?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, so is that, in my opinion, I look at that as being like a disaster. Is it fixable? How do you coach them out of that? Like, because watching that, it's like scary. I'm like, well, if you can't, person, right, who has that imbalance, improper mechanics, if they're not aware of it, if they don't know how to do it, how do we fix that?
Yeah, this is where things get a little tough because I see plenty of runners who, like at first glance, they look awful. Like it looks so bad. Even professional runners. Like, have you been watching the Olympic trials?
No.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I'm obsessed.
Okay.
So that's like all I do right now. Like this entire week, last weekend, there was a little break the past couple days. It's back on as of last night. Finals for the men's steeplechase are tonight. My buddy Daniel Mikulski is racing. He's already got the Olympic qualifying time. So if he's top 3, he's going to Tokyo. I get fired up about it. The steeplechase was my race, so
okay,
no big deal. I got second at Junior Olympic Nationals when I was in high school, so kind of a big. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not a big deal.
He's kind of a big deal. And by the way, I mean, for the record, I listened to one of the 2 podcasts you referenced about the endurance running. I listened to actually quite a bit of your podcast. You have some amazing guests. I learned more about seasonal allergies in one of your podcasts than I had learned in 8 years of school.
Yeah, Dr. David Stukas. He's legit. Yeah. So yeah, when somebody's here's the tough thing, because you can have awful running mechanics and maybe never get injured, and like your body's biometrics are they just work right. Like we evolved to run, so some people are gonna not look great and still be able to run really well, and then there's other people who, like, I was always told, like, I have a very beautiful stride. I still have nagging issues all the time. Like, so it's figuring out, is it a volume issue where your body just gets to a certain point? It's like, hey, I'm not conditioned to deal with this amount of load. So things are going to start breaking down. Is that the issue, or is it the way that you're running is actually causing problems? So because the body is going to do what it assumes is the most efficient. Like the body doesn't want to waste energy. It doesn't want to waste anything. So if you're moving a certain way, it's because your nervous system has programmed it or has calibrated the rest of your body to do something a certain way. So when someone comes to me in pain, typically I'll do a table assessment where it's all passive range of motion. I just want to see where their body's holding tension. From there, we transition into some movements where I want to see how they squat. I want to see how they split squat, how they do a single leg squat. And then from there, I want to see how they run. And if they're passively holding tension, that's going to then show up when they actively move, and then that will probably show up when I watch them run. And so if there's this overlap between where they're having pain or where they're having an issue and how they run, then I know, like, okay, this is where we need to make a change. But for the most part, like pronation and supination, like you want that as a normal part of walking gait, of running, of movement. Like, so one thing that my mentor told me early on was if the body can do it, it should probably be trained. So like if the foot pronates and supinates, like you shouldn't try to avoid pronation. You should just train it appropriately. So I think that's one of those things that can be really tough and confusing. Like, how much of this do I fix? Because if you do too much, then you're at risk of reducing performance. But if you don't do enough, then do you get them out of pain? So,
and I mean, it's kind of, well, no, it's a little too much to say like overcorrect and affecting performance. I just think of, well, what you just had mentioned or touched upon was if you overcorrect something, right? It's like the medicine becomes thy poison. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like we're almost two in the same. The thing that I'm more concerned about though is like that valgus knee and the people that are weak and their neurology is like what's doing it. So I want to know if you can train them out of that, or in most cases, people that are that much of a flight risk, if you will, with that, again, valgus knee, foot just overpronating, ankle and heel just winging out in their gait. And usually those same people will do some awkward stuff with their arms. Yeah. And I'm wondering if that's something that you can break them out of. Does that take like 10,000 hours of work? Or is it really, you modify it just slightly enough, like to get them out of pain? And then I guess it would depend on how elite they want to be, really. It's probably a unique situation.
Sure. So typically what happens is when someone comes in and like, if they come to see me, they're not usually saying, hey, I'm here to just get better. It's usually like, hey, my knee hurts and I have a 10K in 6 weeks, or I have a marathon in 7 days. Like, it's always like last minute. I'm like, okay, whatever. Let's see what we can do. So if there is excessive knee valgus, it's typically not because the body is doing something wrong per se. Perhaps it's excessive tension in their adductors paired up with a weakness in the hip abductors. So it's usually glute max and glute medius. So we can make changes to that in real time. So what I have to do is, in the picture that you saw where I was at Run On this past weekend, where I was digging into my new friend Kim, her adductors were super locked up and her abductors were turned off. So the first step that in the recipe to fixing her is going to be digging into those adductors to get them to quiet down, because they're trying to pull the knees in. And the adductors tend to get recruited as the hip flexors fatigue. So when you're running, especially longer runs, your hip flexors are going to get really fatigued. They're going to get really tired. And so as they fatigue, the body recruits the adductors. So they start working in because they can do some of the same movement. They can assist in pulling the leg forward. So what that does is that tends to quiet down gluteus medius. So after digging into the adductors and stretching them out and trying to return optimal length, then we just start training the gluteus medius, turning that thing on. Mm-hmm. And then once adductors are quieted down, abductors are turned on, then I just train the leg in proper gait. So I'd work on some band Z pulls where I've got a band around they're laying flat on their back. I've got a mini band around their arches, and they're pulling their leg up into that knee up, heel up, toe up, into creating that letter Z. Mm-hmm. And then I'd flip them over and put them in bird dog position. So hands and knees. One knee is going to be on a yoga block, and then they're kicking against that band out of that Z position. So I'm training them to get into that Z position, and then we train to get out of that Z position. And that's all open chain exercise. So we slowly build basically from turning off what's too active and then turning on what's not active enough, and then open chain exercise, and then closed chain exercise, and then run. Okay. And in one session, we can do that. No pain.
Wow.
Usually.
I was going to say, it's like, and I hope you're charging enough money.
I was just told 2 weeks ago by one of my clients that I've seen on and off for 3 or 4 years now. It was so funny. She goes, "Kevin, you don't charge enough." And I was like, "What?" Like, what do you mean? She goes, "Well, like, I go to a masseuse, and like every couple of years, their prices go up, and like, your prices need to go up." No, okay, all right, I gotta bump my prices up. So
yeah, like you segued into what my next question was going to be about the whole turning off a muscle, or like quieting down, right, where something's overactive, mm-hmm. and then actually activating, in this case the abductors or the glute med or gluteus maximus. And you literally gave, so if you students who are tuned in right now, or other people that are in practice that are missing elements of this, like he just gave you,
this is the recipe.
Platinum.
Yeah.
This is beyond gold.
Yeah.
No, that's cool. And I know it works because I do this now very often. I always say the reason you have to see a guy like you, a guy like me, or whoever's going to do the work like this is because you can't actively do it to yourself. Mm-hmm. You have to have the muscle completely passive and churned off, where somebody can actually lengthen what needs to be lengthened. They need to be able to actually go in and get through those levels of proprioception, nociception, proprioception, mm-hmm. two different complete things, as we know. I always talk about the inhibition of nociception, the pain fibers, mm-hmm. to be able to actually quiet that down. They could probably activate it on some level on their own, but I mean, even with a Theragun, to be able to like stimulate it and activate that way, and then have somebody else again against resistance, right, to activate those muscles. But yes, pure platinum. Really, you more than answered the question that I was going to go into on that level. And one of the things I want to know, right? So I am a recreational runner. Mm-hmm. I wish I ran more. So now this is me being selfish. A problem that I continue to encounter all the time is 48 hours in or 2 days into my runs. So I've done 2-3 mile runs, let's say. My back is completely fatigued at the end. I'm susceptible to injury, not just because I'm fatigued, but because of some underlying mechanism, like my back just can't take it. Mm-hmm. I have about 3 or 4 patients who are in the similar realm. They come in, we adjust their fifth lumbar, they're better for a couple of days, they go back, whatever. They go running a few more days, they come back, they're in trouble. Mm-hmm. What do you think that is with that, like back being so fatigued, so taxed, completely associated with exercise? And maybe something about like, is there actual a thing called running tight? Like being like overbraced in the core with that anterior pelvic tilt, and how it just affects the whole chain?
Yes. So that's, without being able to put you on my table and assess you, like 9 times out of 10, when a distance runner comes to me, they have excessively tight hip flexors. They have excessively tight lumbar spine, and it's that anterior pelvic tilt. So, that was my issue. Like when I injured my back, like it wasn't until later that I realized, like, oh, I'm stuck in this pelvic tilt position. Like sometimes it's referred to as club booty, where like when you're dancing in the club and you're just pushing that thing out, I don't know. I never done that, so I can't, I can't confirm.
Uh-huh.
However, like they talk about, the pelvis is like a bowl, and it can tilt forward, it can tilt back, and depending on which muscles are being used more often, like, again, the body wants to be as efficient as possible. So an anterior pelvic tilt for runners, in my opinion, is an adaptation to make you more efficient at running. So the only issue is you've got to figure out at what point is it no longer an adaptation that's helping, and now it's crossed that line, and now it's causing problems. So, because it's weird, the body tends to be really good at, like, all right, if this is what we're doing, I'm going to adapt to be more efficient at it. But sometimes there's this line where it's like, okay, the body needs a little help now.
I always talk about the principle of diminishing returns, and I think it's like applicable with everything in life. But what's amazing is how fast that principle of diminishing return can happen. I.e., say you have a pre-existing like lumbar disc problem, and then you're trying to, do some exercise, and you're in a hollow rock position or a hollow hold, or you're doing excessive sit-ups. That principle of diminishing return is like 5 minutes max, or like, 6 to 10 reps, and all of a sudden you're in trouble. Another thing might be, I'm going to ride my bike, 30 miles, and I'm going to run 15 miles or whatever it might be. And all of a sudden you could buy like a month out of that where you're getting in better shape. Your VO2 max, becomes, increase in number, and you're becoming a more elite athlete. And all of a sudden you just plateau like crazy and then begin to diminish.
Yes.
And there's this amazing realm. Same thing in diet, which we're going to talk about, but yeah.
No, I think you're right. There's certain times where the body just needs a little help. It needs a little adjustment. So there's plenty of examples of, specifically with sprinters, who tend to have to deal with more. Well, you're generating more force. You're generating more ground contact force if you're sprinting versus if you're, just going out for a jog or going out for a run. So I know of high-level sprinters who, like, their body has adapted to have this anterior pelvic tilt so that they can get into these positions more efficiently and get out of them decently efficiently. But it can get to the point where if you're pairing up what you're doing on the track with maybe too much exercise in the weight room that's not getting you out of that pelvic tilt, then you're just reinforcing this anterior pelvic tilt. And then maybe you go home and you're going to drive home. So now you're sitting in your car driving home, and then you get home and you sit on the couch. And so you're just reinforcing this anterior pelvic tilt. And that's where you can get to the point where it's like, okay, like the body's like, all right, we've had enough. Red flag, send the pain signal, let the brain know something's wrong here. So it's not so much that the pelvic tilt is a bad thing. It's just maybe it's excessive. Maybe you're in that position too long. So training to get out of that pelvic tilt, spending a lot of time in a posterior pelvic tilt, I think is like, that's what fixed me. I was excessively anterior, started training a lot more where I was just focusing on my pelvic position, getting out of that anterior tilt, learning how to use my diaphragm and breathe correctly, and actually using my glutes. That took care of it. So that's essentially, it's following that same recipe where if the hip flexors are tight, turn them off. Glutes are not firing, turn them on, get them working, retrain, those whatever movement patterns are being used in the sport, and then replicate it. And then if that doesn't work, then you just go back a step and say, okay, well, I know we turned on the right things and we turned off the right things, but maybe this specific exercise isn't translating enough to on the field play or to on what you're doing on the road when you're running. So let's try a different exercise and we'll see if that works.
You know, I almost feel bad sometimes asking for like $1 million cue. I always refer to it as $1 million cue. And I'm actually just going to give it away right now on my podcast for my $1 million cue. And this is when I was a CrossFit coach, and even now when I watch people squat, it's butt back on the way up. Butt back on the way up, to me, fixes people's squats. Whatever, you know, bottom line, there, buddy, who's listening to this, we just fixed your squat.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. I don't have a Patreon, but I should. So what I want to know, what's $1 million cue actually for people to do on their own to activate their glutes? I didn't even think of it until just now, but is there one?
That's a tough one. The only reason I'm a little hesitant there is because I have a few clients who I'm thinking of one specifically. I hope he doesn't listen to this because he'll know I'm talking about him. When we're doing certain exercises, he cannot fire his glutes to save his life. Like, certain exercises, it's totally fine. And like giving him a cue for certain exercises, like doesn't happen, just doesn't work. So, and like he knows, and he's like, I'm trying. And I'm like, I know, man, like let's do something different so that we can get those glutes to fire. So sometimes it's not always necessarily the cue. Sometimes it's instead of trying to give a cue, I'll just regress. So I find that a lot of times the less coaching I have to do, the more success I'll have with the client, just because I may only see them like at most 3 times a week. So most of my clients I'll see once or twice a week. Mm-hmm. I've got some clients I only see once a month, or only when they're hurting. They'll just come in, hey, you know, give me a tune up. You know, I'll call you in 3 months. All right, whatever. So if I don't have to cue them, or I don't have to tell them, hey, like, think about this, if I can regress it, so I'm just like, hey, do this exercise, that tends to be a little bit better. But there's some classics in the glute cueing category. I've heard crack the nut. Think about, you know, putting the nut between your cheeks, crack that nut. When I was in grad school, we watched this really, really old video about Olympic lifting, and like we were all cracking up about it because like it was like VHS tape, like the lines and everything. Yeah. Oh, it was so bad. And this guy is like cueing. I have no idea why, but he's cueing these kids, and he's saying, "Don't lose your money." And he was like explaining that like if you,
I'm just putting my hand in my left pocket.
How much can we get into on this podcast? Is this
You can say whatever. We can say fuck. We can say asshole. We can do whatever we want. We can talk about sex and Cardi B. I don't know.
This guy was telling kids to pretend they had like a dollar bill between their cheeks and to not lose their money. And I was like, why are you telling kids this? Like, this sounds so bad. But that was the cue that he liked to use. So
he was raising little exotic dancers.
Yes,
apparently.
That's what I thought. I was like, bro.
Yeah, that's odd.
Just wait till 2020.
And
can't do that anymore.
And honestly, here I thought you were just going to say like, hey, glute bridge. Like the best way to do it is to glute bridge. And I was like, say, yeah, okay, I was right. But no, I was like, there's got to be more. How do you wake up those glutes?
Yeah. So a lot of it is I start out teaching my client, and this is super annoying for people, a 10-second plank. And people are like, I can plank for 2 minutes. And I'm like, that's awesome. I bet you can't plank like this for 2 minutes. Let's see if you can do it for 10 seconds. So it's like the hard style of, or long lever plank, sometimes it's called, but like I don't even necessarily put my client in where they're at an excessively long lever. I just put them in a plank position, right? So elbows are right under their shoulders. make sure they've got as neutral of a spine as possible. Sometimes I'll put a dowel there just to make sure we're close. And I'm not like, it has to be perfect, lumbar curve, perfect cervical curve, perfect thoracic curve. Like, let's make it look nice. Do you have decent looking posture? Perfect. From there, go into as much of a posterior pelvic tilt as possible. So you're just squeezing your glutes as hard as you can. And most people can do that for like a second and then they relax. And so you've got to like, no. Don't just squeeze and then let go. Like when you flex your muscles in front of a mirror, like when you're checking out your biceps, checking out your pecs in front of a mirror, whatever, you're not just flexing and then relaxing. So it's like the same thing. You've got to squeeze your glutes as hard as you can. Squeeze your abs as hard as you can, and now you're in a full posterior pelvic tilt. You're getting that neurological activation through all those glute fibers. And then think about tucking your elbows down to your toes, and think about pulling your toes up to your elbows. And that's going to engage even more of your core, of your torso. I hate saying core. Everybody, I train my core. I don't know what that means, y'all. I do, but it's one of those funny things. So doing that where you're squeezing your glutes as hard as you can, you're squeezing your abs as hard as you can, you're actually engaging the rest of your upper body. Your lats are getting worked because you're thinking about pulling down. Your quads are getting worked a ton because now you're trying to pull your toes up. Like basically everything, every muscle in your body is working. Not every muscle, but everything's working. If you can maintain that where you're actively flexing it, everything as hard as you can, like you should only be able to maintain that for 10 seconds. Because if you can go harder than that, or if you can go longer than that, then by definition, it's not max effort. So you're turning a plank into a max effort exercise, and you shouldn't be able to do that very long. So I start with that, and like that gets the glutes fired up big time.
Okay, very cool. Now,
and it's exhausting.
No, it sounds exhausting. I'm to be honest, I can't wait to try it when I get home because I've got to do something that's more sustainable. Like I've been experimenting with so many things to kind of give me this longevity that I so desire to have in terms of being able to recover from what I deem like a very simple run, which will kind of segue into something else in a second. But I've been working with this guy, Damon Patterson, over in Mesquite. Actually has multiple gyms, and we were doing something called RPR, proprioceptive reset, I believe. But we were using a lot of like body touch stimulation to kind of activate muscles. But also he was taking me through, and I'm sure he knows this, the magic that was this progressive. It was progressing through like my limited range of motion, like passively stretching me through where I was hesitant to go, where I couldn't actively do myself. And him being able to spot me like through where I couldn't per se go into sustained flexion actively, but him being able to passively pull me through there, and then being able to have my abductors turn on by doing like abduction of the leg with the toe turned in to stimulate the glutes. It was sort of like magical, and it had quite a long effect. And the only thing I can say is that not only did I not really keep up on it in the last couple of months because I like re-aggravated my back or whatever, and it very well could be the answer, but I'm always looking for something active, right, that I can just do on my own. And now that I've listened and I can visualize everything you talked about in that plank position, and I'm going to go ahead and try to apply that before and after my runs, especially this weekend that I'm feeling good again. I want to get out there. Yeah. Which, okay. If someone begins to run and they're like, I'm going to go out and do a 2-miler because maybe they used to be trained or whatever, like me, right? I can go out and easily do 2 to 3 miles, but still I'm too fatigued. Have I broken any like running progression laws, especially for recreational runners? Am I starting too hard by that?
That's or is depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
If when it comes down to it, like it's so easy for like one part of my brain is like here's a logical progression. Run 3 to 5 minutes day 1. Next day, run 3 to 5 minutes. Next day, run 3 to 5 minutes. Do that for a week. Following week, run 5 to 8 minutes and do it that way. Like, I know people. So there's this guy, Nick Willis. He was 2-time Olympic medalist. The only man who's run 19 consecutive years of sub 4-minute miles. The dude's phenomenal. From New Zealand, ran at University of Michigan. Anyway.
I'm jealous.
Yeah, he's super legit. He's phenomenal. He's a great guy. Anyway, when he would get injured, his return to running was a 10-week build. And he would run 1 mile every day the first week. And then he would run 2 miles every day the second week. So he'd go from 7 miles to 14 miles to 21 miles. Like every week, he would just add a mile every day until he got to 10 weeks or week 10, yeah. So now he's running 70 miles. So that was his return. So I don't know. Like, the easy answer is everyone's different. It just depends.
Yeah.
But
which is probably the right answer.
Yeah. So the way that I look at it is the way that I didn't do it when I was in high school, which was just, how far do I feel like running today? Okay, I'll just run that far. Like, that's probably not the best way to look at long-term maintenance or being able to run long-term. What's probably best is to set up some sort of systematic program where you're not running further than what you've decided beforehand, so that you can then match that or slightly exceed that the following week. Okay. So, and when it comes to like total weekly mileage, like that progression where Willis was going from 7 miles to 14 miles to 21 miles, like in building that way, that's not normal. Like, don't do that. He is super high caliber, best of the best runners. Like, he could accumulate that much volume that fast and that change in volume. So like Jack Daniels, who's, famous running coach and famous exercise physiologist, I believe that he says, don't quote me on this, I'm sorry if I get it wrong, but basically your weekly mileage should essentially be the same for a couple weeks before you take a jump up, right? So if you're shooting for 30 miles in a week, like for some person, like that might not be very much. That's about how much mileage I do every week right now. I shoot for about 30. And it's wearing me down right now. Like, earlier today, I was talking with one of my clients and I'm like, dude, all of this, I just want to nap more. I just want to sleep longer, and like I can't. So I've got to figure out, okay, is this actually sustainable? I thought 30 to 35 miles a week was going to be easy to maintain. And now I've got to reevaluate. Okay, am I prioritizing my sleep and my rest and my recovery? And am I fueling appropriately so that I can maintain 30 miles a week? So I'm getting off on a little bit of a tangent there. But all that to say, if you think about things long term, what do you want to be doing 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? If you want to be running, 3-4 times a week in 10 years, then you probably shouldn't go crazy with how much you're adjusting your running. And if 2 to 3 days consecutively is causing a lot of issues, then maybe cut your volume in half, see how you feel, and then maybe stay there. Like, a lot of aerobic improvements come from just repeat exposure to the same stress. You don't always have to increase your speed. You don't have to increase your volume and mileage. You don't have to increase your running duration. Like, this is a hard lesson for me. And I am like very guilty of not taking my own advice here, because I did 30 miles last week. I should do 35 miles this week. Like, no. Do the same thing and I'm going to get better. Like, you don't have to always, like it's the exact same thing when you see guys in the weight room loading, a couple extra 2.5 pounders on each side because they're like, well, I did, 225 last week, so I'm going to do, 230 this week. Like, maybe if you just did the same weight last week, but you do it a little better, maybe you'll still get stronger and you're not going to put yourself like the temptation is to always increase intensity. Like that's rarely the best long-term solution.
Gotcha.
A long-winded answer.
No. and I just think back of like, Rich Roll podcast, which I listened to a ton a couple of years back. I mean, that's when I like really started to conceptualize podcasting in general, was talking about staying in zone one and how humbling it is. Mm-hmm. And even when you think you're ready to move forward, to like stay, on that lower level of volume or load or intensity or duration. Mm-hmm. And I know for a fact I'm guilty of that, and much like you alluded to with your own training. And and it could literally be the principle of diminishing return. It's like my back erector muscles that are just QLs and whatever else. They're just like, stop, Yoni, stop. Like you've done too much too fast. And we gave you a day out of it. And then you go to work and bend over all day and, adjust people and go ahead. Let's try it again. And it's like, no, F you. Now we're going to send that signal, like shut it down.
Yeah. It's just threshold. It reached a level where it's like, I can't deal with that amount of stress anymore.
All right, let's change gears because we're about an hour in, and now we're really going to get into the meat and potatoes. And everybody knows.
Oh, meat and potatoes.
Me and my food. All right, so look, briefly tell us the Self-Reliant Diet. That's your first book?
That's my second book.
I ruined it all.
It's all good.
The Hormonal Nutrition is your first novel.
Yes.
And then Self-Reliant Diet. Let's tell the audience, what exactly can they expect? What is this all about?
Gotcha. So immediately out of grad school, I can't say immediately. For the first year or two out of grad school, I was still very much in like academic mode, where I was reading a ton of journals and a ton of peer review articles, and still trying to maintain one foot in academia because my plan was to go back and get my PhD. And so to help stay sharp with my writing, I decided, you know what, I need to do something so that when I do go back to school, I'm not like 2 years out of like writing practice. Like it's just so much a part of academia. Yeah. You've got to be able to write. So I was here in Dallas. I had basically just moved back here, and I had quite a bit of free time. I didn't have a full load with work, so I was like, all right, how can I do something that's actually going to be beneficial to me and beneficial to, to society in general, perhaps, or to my clients specifically. So I wasn't really at the point where I was comfortable coaching a client on how to change body composition. Like I didn't know what to coach a person. I knew the concepts, but I didn't know how to program someone's diet or to program their calories and macros. I knew how to calculate this stuff, but I didn't know how to like put it all into practice. So I was like, okay, if I can't provide that level of service, what can I do for my clients? And so a lot of them didn't even want to track. They didn't care about their calorie needs. So I was like, okay, well, I know that your hormones have a very profound effect on your metabolic rate. So I was like, okay, if I can compile all of this data on what I consider the most metabolically influential hormones, like maybe there's some actual useful information here. So hormonal nutrition is like 0% my original work. I didn't do any research. None of it is based off my experience. It's just looking at how does insulin work, How does leptin work? How does ghrelin work? How does glucagon work? How does CCK, PYY, GLP-1, testosterone, growth hormone, cortisol, IGF-1. I think that's about all of them. What do they do in the body? What is their functional purpose? How do they relate to whether you're hungry or not, or whether you're full or not? How do they relate to maintaining muscle mass, or like cortisol, decreasing muscle mass sometimes? So what do they do? What do you need to know about it? And then how can specific foods that you eat at specific times affect those specific hormones? How can specific exercises affect those hormones? So the idea is your hormones are like driving your car, and you're in the passenger seat. And if you don't know anything about them, and you don't know that if you eat protein at a specific time, you're going to have a more profound effect on your satiation hormones, so that it takes longer to digest. So you're going to feel fuller longer. So if your goal is to lose weight and you're hungry all the time, if you eat a high protein, high fat meal, that takes a longer time to digest. And so you're going to feel fuller longer. You're going to feel satiated. So that's going to help. If you eat a super high carbohydrate meal, you're probably like digesting carbohydrates is very fast. So you're probably going to be, your stomach's going to send the signal, hey, we're empty, about an hour after you eat a high carbohydrate meal. So if your goal is to lose weight and you're eating a ton of carbs, you're probably going to feel hungry more often. So it's things like that. So I tried to break it down into as practical chunks as possible. And if you check the very end of every chapter, it's like, hey, here's the bullet points. If you don't want to read any of this because it's just compilations of research, just here's the bullet points. Do this, do this, do this to increase insulin sensitivity. Have a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar before a high carbohydrate meal. To improve testosterone production, do this and this and this. To improve growth hormone or mechanogrowth factor or whatever the case may be. So that's hormonal nutrition. It's allowing you to take back the driver's seat and manipulate your hormones a little bit.
Okay.
So that's that one. The self-reliant diet is, in my opinion, a much better book. Just because you can follow all the advice in the hormonal nutrition, but if you're in a calorie surplus and you're trying to lose weight, sorry. Like, that's kind of important. You need to know. You need to know what your budget is. You need to know how many calories you need in order to make any type of change that you're looking for. So if your goal, pardon me, those bubbles in that Topo Chico.
Oh yeah.
If your goal is to increase your muscle mass and increase weight, but you're in a calorie deficit, it's not going to happen, right? So the analogy that I use is, if you want to save up for a trip to Disney World, but you're in debt, you're not going to Disney World, right? So if your goal is to elicit a specific physiological adaptation to training, and maybe that's increased strength or power or speed, but you're in a huge calorie deficit, your body's like, okay, so we need 4,000 calories a day, and you're giving us 2,000 calories. So do you want this 2,000 calories to go to your immune system? Do you want to go to your brain to keep your brain working? Because that's kind of important. It's like running everything. Do you want it to go to making sure that your heart continues to pump? Where do you want this money to go to? Money, because calories are the body's currency. So the self-reliant diet is my attempt to teach people how to calculate their caloric need. And we've got a ton of data, a ton of research on these calorie prediction equations. It'd be nice if you could just do direct calorimetry, but for the human body, you can't do that. So what we can do is we can use these equations, and they're estimates, but they're extremely accurate. And from there, you can calculate how many calories you need within a certain range. And then there's always individual variability. So you make adjustments based off of that. But from there, you know what your budget is. And then after you know your budget, then you can determine what is the appropriate breakdown of the macronutrients for you. So I like my clients to hit a gram of protein per pound of body weight per day. Some people don't. They just can't do that on a consistent basis. So instead of trying to set someone up for failure and say, hey, you weigh 150 pounds, you need to hit 150 grams of protein every day. If they can only come in at 120, and every day I'm like, you are 30 grams under budget. Like, this is bad. Instead of like making somebody feel bad for that, we just make the adjustment. Okay, 120 grams is way better than what you were doing when you weren't tracking, which was probably 70 grams. So this is still a win. As we go forward, maybe we try to increase that a little bit to 130 and then eventually to 140 or whatever the case may be. Protein, I just consider the second most important priority. So after your calories, after your budget, hitting protein. If you want to adapt to your training, if you want to repair, if you want to recover, like, you need those amino acids. After that, we calculate your fat need. Pretty much all of those hormones that we talked about in hormonal nutrition, not all of them, but the sex-based hormones, so testosterone, cortisol, estrogen, things like that. Those are all built on a cholesterol backbone. Without fat in your diet, like, your hormones just can't really do their job correctly. So not only is fat super important as a source of energy, it's also like you have to have it for hormonal health. So I like between like a starting out point, like 25 to 30% of your total calories coming from fat. I don't like low fat diets. Like, they tend to, I think, do much more long-term harm than they do good, even if they do help you lose weight. At what cost? Well, at the cost of hormonal health, which down the road is going to be bad. So, and then with whatever is left in your budget, it's all carbohydrate. And then for most athletes, like, that's a really good setup. But then for some athletes, they're like, hey, I don't want all these carbs. Let's shift it to fat. I'm like, perfect. Hit your budget, hit your protein goal, have as much fat as you want. And then other clients are like, hey, I feel like I do better with a higher concentration of carbohydrates. I'm like, all right, that's fine. You just can't go below this level of fat. Like, this is the bottom line. You have to have this. So that's essentially the self-reliant diet. It's just to teach you how to do that. It teaches you how to track, teaches you how to audit so that you're staying on track. It shows you how to set up a calorie deficit if you want to lose weight or improve your body comp by reducing body fat. It shows you how to improve your body composition by increasing lean tissue mass and how to set up a calorie surplus and all of that. And the most important part, in my opinion, is living at maintenance. Like, that's where you're going to make the most significant changes in body composition. You're not going to feel like you're dieting. You still get to eat all the things that you want and like, and nothing's off limits. So living at maintenance, in my opinion, like, that's the key to success, especially long-term success. You can't be in a calorie deficit forever. So live at maintenance, enjoy life, enjoy what you're eating.
That's your slogan. That's like one of your catchphrases.
Live at maintenance,
caloric maintenance.
That's it, dude. That's the key.
Now, I've brought this up in the past, but I really, really want to dive in deeper with you. So you talked about like body composition, and I always look at, like, when I think of caloric maintenance, or I think of, and it's Benedict, what's the equation?
Harris-Benedict
equation. Like, I look at that, especially when I'm training. It's like, okay, how am I going to get like 3,400 calories in today or whatever kind of thing? Body composition to me means like a very strict strategic diet that leaves out a lot of foods. Yet when I think of performance, I think of, okay, if I need chips, crackers, and donuts, I'm going to need chips, crackers, and donuts. Now, at the same time, I can't see how that would ever give someone the body composition maybe that they desire. So am I right to think that is it really go into like just how specific you're training and what your macros are?
So if at the end of the day, if your body needs 4,000 calories and you're getting 80+% of that from high quality sources of food, then in general, if going, 10 to 20% from stuff that most people would consider unhealthy food, I still think you're winning.
Okay.
If you're getting all of your calories from chips and snack food like crackers and cupcakes, and like, you're not going to feel great. You can still lose weight doing that. You can be in there's quite a few anecdotal like pilot studies or anecdotal accounts of people who there was an exercise physiologist who went on a Twinkie diet, and he only ate Twinkies, did his blood work beforehand, and then for 30 days was in a calorie deficit, but all he ate were Twinkies, and then did blood work at the end. And because he was in a calorie deficit, his blood work was better. Like, he lost weight, and it was like 30 days maybe. Like, it was a short-term study. But what is important to note is that you don't, like, the whole idea, in my opinion, the whole idea of eating clean is kind of, that can be a huge hurdle for some people because they can't necessarily maintain long-term consistency if all they do is eat quote-unquote clean foods. Right. So if you can maintain your calorie goal by eating some chocolate every once in a while, like, do it, enjoy it, but just know that salty foods, sweet foods, especially when it's processed, we call these hyper palatable foods, where it's hard to eat 10 chips, and that usually is a serving. Like I'm gonna eat some chips, and then if you don't count them out, then okay, now it's gonna be hard to track because you're just eating a bag of chips, right? So things like that tend to make it more difficult, but you can. Lane Norton and Sohee Lee are both, like, a lot of what I understand about macro counting, if it fits your macros, determining your caloric need, comes from them. And both of them, like, Lane Norton he was a pro natural bodybuilder and a professional power lifter, and he was winning physique competitions or bodybuilding competitions and eating ice cream every night. Sohee Lee got her pro card, and to prove that you can do it this way, she had a Snickers bar every single day, 30 days leading up to the show, that she then won and got her pro card. So you can, if you're very, very strict with, okay, this is the amount of calories I need, this is how many I'm going to eat, a little bit can come from, these quote unquote not perfect sources maybe, but it allows you to be perfect with your consistency. Like, that's how you're going to win. So
it's like, just don't lose your freaking mind.
Exactly.
While you're there.
Yeah.
And those hyper palatable foods make it very difficult. And then it's just about, like, being honest with ourselves before we say, like, yeah, that didn't work.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. This counting calories doesn't work. Like, well, no, it does work. Like, we have a ton of data on it, like tons and tons of like clinical studies where these are extremely controlled diets. We know that if you put a person in this amount of a calorie deficit, they're going to lose weight. If you put them in this amount of a calorie surplus, they're going to gain weight. Like, we know this for a fact. This is as much as people like to debate it on social media, like, when you look at all of the evidence, it's like, you can't refute it. Like, this is how the body works. So, but a lot of people are like, oh, well, it's all hormones. Like, oh, it's artificial sweeteners. It's like, Not really. Like a little bit of these things is okay. The issue is when you say, oh, I'm just going to have a little bit, and then you don't control it. And then you're 500 calories over your goal, but you think you're in a 100 calorie deficit. Like, no, you're 600 calories over what you think you are because you think you're under and you're 5 over. So it's things like that, but it requires a lot of attention. Sometimes people don't want to pay attention.
Now, do you think there's like a spectrum of like autoimmune type reactions? So somebody like me, for example, like I just do horrible with grains, like just horrible. It's really, if I'm being honest with myself, yeah, obviously, like if I'm eating a whole bunch of combinations of bad food, or I'm just like starving because maybe I am exercising a bunch and I am trying to put away all those calories. Yes, these combinations of foods, and yes, eating whatever in excess is obviously going to be what bothers me. But like if I was to go have just a bowl of quinoa with some vegetables right now, like I would be destroyed. Like I couldn't handle it. If I have some wheat bread or something, like forget about it. Like I'm done. So I always think of like health on a spectrum. I hate putting something as like, oh, well, that's Hashimoto's and that's ankylosing spondylitis or whatever. But we know the science exists. We know the cytokine and the interleukin, these inflammatory markers.
Yes.
So are there people, I almost forgot where I was going with this, but like this like autoimmune type reaction that lives on a spectrum, is there a way, I guess, there's just people that just need to leave those things out, period. And I mean, I may have overcomplicated such a simple question to ask.
No, this is where it gets a little tricky for me, because this is like beyond my scope of practice as a sport nutritionist. Like this is getting into like clinical dietetics, and I am not a dietitian.
Okay.
So, but like from what I understand, like you're exactly right. There's certain things like celiacs, for example. Certain people have full-blown celiacs, and other people are gluten intolerant, and there's variations between those two, and those are not necessarily the same thing. You can not respond well to things that contain gluten, but never be diagnosed with celiac disease. So, it's important to find things that maybe are inflammatory triggers for you, or things that it may not even be anything other than like, I just don't feel as good eating this food. And like, I think it's completely okay to just say, you know what? I don't feel good when I eat this. I'm just going to remove it from my diet. And as long as it's not like, as long as you're still able to get a variety of nutrient dense foods elsewhere, then like go for it. We've got so much variety when it comes to food. I think it's probably okay if you're like grains. Like, what are you missing out from your diet if you remove grains wholesale? I don't think you're missing out on a whole lot. Like you can get a lot of those nutrients elsewhere. So if you're like removing, an entire macronutrient group, maybe that's not great. But even there, like there's individual variation where some people it's like, nope, can't have this. So, but in general, yeah, when it comes to sport performance, I'm looking more along the lines of what's going to allow you to train the most intensely, what will allow us to accumulate the most high quality training sessions. Stick with that. If there's something else, it's like, well, this is trending right now, or this is in season right now, and I want to eat this, but I don't feel great. Like, what are we doing? So,
well, that perfect thing to segue into now. All right, I'm going to just say it like this. What the fuck is fat adaptation?
Nice. Yes.
This like keto world, these, runners, Mark Sisson talks a lot about it, fat adapted. All right. So like A, what is it? B, should runners be doing this? I don't know. Let's do it. Let's
okay.
Go there.
So from my understanding, fat adapted is kind of like, you're not fully keto, but you're trying to get all of the potential benefits of being keto without having to be keto, so that you can still utilize carbohydrates when you feel like it would be beneficial to you. So we know that if you eat certain foods on a regular basis, your gut microbiome is like geared and adapted towards that thing, right? So if you eat if you're a farmer and you only eat what you produce and then you go to McDonald's, like, you're gonna have a bad time, right? So it's kind of the same thing. So if you eat a higher percentage of your fat, of your total calories from fat, and you do that consistently over time, you're training your body to utilize more fat as a source of fuel while you're training and competing. This is a potential benefit for endurance sports where the amount of time that it takes to convert a molecule of fat or a gram of fat, let's say, versus a gram of carbohydrate into usable ATP is less important. Like if you're doing super high intensity fast power sports, let's say, then trying to utilize fat as a source of fuel, like it just takes too long to convert that fat into usable energy. Mm-hmm. What you end up with, like, so there's a reason that a gram of fat is 9 calories and a gram of carbohydrate is 4 calories. And that's because the amount of energy that you can extract from fat is much higher than what you can extract from carbohydrates or even protein. It just takes longer. The system to break it down is essentially aerobic only. So you can utilize carbohydrate aerobically or anaerobically, but the amount of time that you can work at an intensity where you can actually extract that energy is much, much shorter. So the idea, the theory is, if I eat more fat and get more fat in my diet, then I can utilize more stored fat while I'm training and competing, which means now I'm less dependent on fueling during my competition. So I think this idea got popularized with like marathon, ultramarathon, and triathlons because so many people who were very new to the sport were having a lot of issues with fueling during the bike and during the run or like on the marathon. Marathon or ultramarathon.
You want another water?
Sure. Why not?
Let me get that for you, my guest.
Awesome. Thank you so much. In short, I think that's the whole idea behind being fat adapted is you get to utilize, you're less dependent on carbohydrate supplementation during your training or during your sport. And then you're therefore less at risk of GI issues. Like nobody wants to stop in the middle of their triathlon to use the porta potty. Oh. So if you're fat adapted, maybe you don't need to fuel at all, or maybe you only need to fuel, half the amount of calories or half the amount of time that you would normally do. So like with my triathletes, I like to shoot for about 60 grams of carbohydrate every hour. Like that's not enough to replace what you're losing in an hour, but that's about all the body can handle if it's one source of carbohydrate. So with fat, I don't know that I'm not even sure we have an exact amount of fat that you can utilize per hour, but it's almost like, well, maybe you don't need to supplement at all.
Well, I was thinking about that, and I was reading articles, and honestly, it would take me way too long to cipher through my iPad right now because I did a terrible job in terms of my note-taking preparation for today. But I do know that when we're in an aerobic state, or at least the physiology says, right, we're using these type 1 muscle fibers, it's aerobic, oxygen, we're in a fat burning where we use fat more than we're relying on our glycogen or glucose storage for these like fast twitch kind of things. Mm-hmm. However, you need to be in sustained aerobic activity at a high enough intensity, as I understand it, for a long enough period of time to actually be utilizing all that fat, which brings me to the next question, and tell me if I'm right or wrong here. because this is my understanding of it, is it still kind of goes glucose, glycogen, fat, you know? And in that regard, then we're fat adapted only when we go through glucose, glycogen, and then utilizing our fat. And then I would also imagine that the way you'd be fat adapted is you'd actually have to have a bit more body fat, i.e. sort of a CrossFit more body, which in that case, if you're like an endurance athlete, you're probably more fat adapted than you're all as an endurance athlete, especially at a high level, are pretty much fat adapted. But like you were like, but as you alluded to, and I'm totally with you, getting carbs, because there is like actual scientific, there's like, they have the equations done, right? Like you need X amount of carbs at X amount of miles or time at a certain intensity. So the question is then, do you have enough fat readily available on you or in your system prior to that it's not affecting your digestion, i.e. I'm cramping while I'm running, to then burn more fat, i.e. fat adapted? You know, I don't know.
So if you have a higher concentration of fat in your diet, you'll actually increase the amount of circulating free fatty acids in your bloodstream. So you'll have more usable fat available, and your body will adapt to the fuel sources that you give it. However, the way that you can utilize that fuel is dependent on your intensity, right? So if you there's going to be outliers everywhere, but like Dom D'Agostino, he's like as keto as you can get, but he can also still deadlift 500 plus pounds. And for him, he's not working in a level where he's accumulating so much training where there's a negative effect on his ability to reproduce ATP. So, all that to say, if you're eating more fat, then you'll have more fat available as a source of fuel. There'll be more circulating fat. And also, even if you're not eating any carbohydrate, your body will convert protein into glucose and store that as glycogen via gluconeogenesis. So even if you're not eating carbs at all and you're, full-blown keto, you still will have a decent amount of stored glucose and glycogen. It just won't be as much as if you're eating a higher, carbohydrate diet. So,
it's interesting that you said that. I was listening to a podcast the other day. I think it was called like Peak Performance Podcast, and somebody was on and they actually talked about how there is no energy benefit to the body from protein. Is they made some kind of statement like that where it's like you want to be getting actual carbohydrates or actual good quality enough fats from the real food sources, because other than the amino acids and the repairing of the tissue, of the muscle, of the tissue, of the collagen and the fibers, blah, 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 the amino acids, everything the protein is doing for our body, it's not a readily available source of or energy, right? So even though it gets converted, through the liver, right? And gluconeogenesis happens, it's not a very reliable source, which is funny. And the whole reason I'm even repeating this is because I feel that too many people who want to do a keto diet, or dare I say carnivore or paleo, where they're just completely ignoring carbs, because a lot of people that I feel would even listen to this or that are in the avenue of what we're talking about, whether they're like teeter-tottering on the fence of whether or not they're going to run a marathon versus like, like me, I want to run 3-4 miles a day. Say they're low carb. They're like, I got to watch out for the carbs. But then they're eating not enough fat, too much protein, almost no carbohydrate. Now their blood sugar's probably messed up. Gluconeogenesis is happening at a rate where everything's dumping at once. It's not a desirable like happy medium to where you're like getting sufficient energy, even though again like your body will use glucose, glycogen, what it has, until it starts going into the fat. But they don't have readily good quality source of fat available. I mean, does that even make sense what I'm saying?
I think so. Yeah, there's a lot of people who think they're keto but are eating too much protein, and they're actually not, because amino acids are insulinogenic. So, and there's specific ones that will really spike insulin.
I'm glad you said that. That was much more well said in that word alone, because all the time I'm rambling on. I even mentioned blood sugar, but yes, insulinogenic. We love insulin. Let's hold on to insulin. Let's start getting everything into the wrong cells. Let's start storing more, and that's the thing. Too much protein, too much excess storage.
Yeah. So especially if you're in a calorie surplus where maybe you're not tracking, you're eating a lot of protein and you're eating some fat, but you're not eating any carbs, and you think you're either at maintenance or in a deficit, but you're eating so much protein that it actually puts you into a calorie surplus. At that point, I think what you might see on paper as a quote unquote very healthy diet will actually lead to down the road metabolic syndrome. So, and I can't say that as a clinician because I'm not, but if you follow the logical outworking of, if you're in a calorie surplus, it doesn't matter what the macros are. If you're in a surplus, you're probably going to end up unhealthy. You'll be in an inflamed state. It's not going to be great. So if you're in a calorie deficit, I'm not convinced that dumping a ton of insulin is necessarily a bad thing. If you're in a deficit, then your body's going to be your body will be much more sensitive to pulling and utilizing energy from wherever it's at. There's going to be certain cases where maybe that's not true with extreme obesity perhaps, but for the general person, like that guy who did the Twinkie diet, he's eating hydrogenated fat and sugar and lost weight, and all he was doing was pumping insulin, right? So yeah, and that's slightly different because now we're talking about protein, but it's one of those things that this is why I think knowing your caloric need and being able to track is so important, because I don't think that you have to be so strict with what you ingest. Sure, there's a spectrum, for sure, 100%. There's a quality spectrum, there's a quantity spectrum. It's best to be on the side of the spectrum that has the highest quality of food. But I think that there's a lot of times where perfection becomes the enemy of what's good. And then if we're all preaching, hey, everybody's got to eat organic, everybody's got to eat this specific way, you have to eat clean, you've got to do it this way, this is the only way to do it. You're setting up a lot of people for failure, and they'd be relatively healthy if we just said, hey, here's your calorie needs, here's your range around your calorie maintenance, live in this range, eat the things you want, what's good for you. Everybody knows what's healthy. You put a bunch of options in front of somebody and they're like, this is good, that's coming out of a box, and inside the box there's a bag, and the food is coming out of that bag. Yeah, this is probably better. It just came out of the ground, right? Everybody knows kind of what's healthy and what's not. But if you say you have to eat this, you can never have that, then people are like, I don't know how to do that. I can't do that. So, and even athletes, it's the same way. So where the caloric need tends to be way higher. So sometimes you have to eat that in order to hit your calorie need so that you can wake up the next day and train intensely again.
If you had best guess, why are there some people, and usually I see this in females, they're eating 700 calories, and I know there's a pass to it, but say for 4 months, they're eating 700 calories a day and they're not losing weight. Legit, people's metabolism being so broken. What do you think? What can we attribute that to?
So the body will do whatever it has to do to keep you alive. And first of all, people are really, really bad at tracking. I just said it's really important for people to track. In general, people can be off by as much as 50% of what they actually eat versus what they say they eat.
Yeah.
So that sucks. People are really, really bad at calculating how much they're expending as well. Mm-hmm. So the more you're in a calorie deficit, the more efficient your body will become with those calories, to the point where it's possible where you could damage your metabolism so much that if you're only eating that many calories, your body's basically not really, you're not burning anything. You've slowed your metabolic rate down so much that everything that's ingested is like hyper managed once it gets inside. So I don't think that's as common as people have been told it is, because everybody's like, oh, my hormones are messed. Like, I hear this all the time. My hormones are messed up, and I tried tracking, and I was in a calorie deficit, and I only ate 1,500 calories a day, and I know my basal metabolic rate is 1,800. So plus activity, if I'm in 1,500 calorie, if I'm only eating 1,500 calories, like I'm probably in a 1,000 calorie deficit. And I did that for 3 weeks, and I didn't lose any weight. I'm like, yeah, doubt it. But you can't say that. Like, no, you weren't doing any of that. But it is possible for your metabolic rate to slow the longer you're in a calorie deficit, because the body doesn't want you to starve. So what it will do is it will shut down a ton of non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So like Lane Norton talks about this when he was prepping for a show where he's deliberately in as significant of a calorie deficit as possible so that he's burning fat and losing fat mass, but not so much that he's also losing lean tissue mass. But like, you're talking about a serious calorie deficit. He's still training to maintain muscle, mass. Mm-hmm. And he would just like be watching TV, and he could like feel himself blinking very slowly. And like, I don't want to watch this, but the remote's over there. Guess I'm watching this. Like, your motivations will change. You won't fidget anymore. Like, if you're not eating, then your body's like, okay, well, no tapping your foot when you're sitting down, or no like fidgeting. Like, you're just not going to expend calories that the body doesn't have available. So this is a little off topic, but this is one reason why knowing your maintenance level range is important, because your maintenance level, according to your calorie calculation, might be 2,000. But if you're eating more than that, now you're giving your body a bigger budget for non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So you'll probably fidget more. You'll probably, like, your body's going to maintain your weight, because it's like, okay, well, we're a little over budget. All right, we don't have to be as frugal with these calories. Spend them wherever, right? So, but if you only have a budget of, let's say, $7, we'll try to like make it similar to, the 700 calories. Like, if you've got a budget for $7 and you've got to go to the grocery store and purchase everything you need for a meal, like, you're going to take your time and you're going to pick out things so that you feel full, versus like, if you have, if you've got $30, like, you can buy a bunch of stuff that like, that wasn't even that good. I'm gonna throw that away. Like, I still have all this food. You know what I mean? So the body will become super efficient with whatever you give it, the more you're in a calorie deficit. So yeah, unfortunately, it becomes a race to the bottom, where it's like, we're not going to lose any weight because we've got to hold on to this. If we're only getting 700 calories, then we're not giving anything up. Gotcha. We're just going to hold on to all of it. So
now, for the people that are listening, and a question that just popped into my head, I want to hear it from you. If you only had one choice, weightlifting or cardio, and when it comes to fat loss, what do you say?
Weightlifting, 100%.
Yeah. And that's what the research says.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Like, what's the word we're looking for? That for every X amount of muscle that we actually increase, we continue to burn more fat,
Sure.
even at rest.
Yep.
The lean mass, effect of what you're trying to do, because everybody thinks they want to lose weight. And this is something I said, and I'm sure you'll back me here, is we're not trying to lose weight. We're trying to keep lean mass, decrease body fat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. You're trying to improve body comp, like by losing fat mass. That's the way to do it. So yeah, it's difficult because when people look at, again, like the Olympic trials are on right now. You look at all these like 1,500, 5K, 10K steeplechase runners, like they are super lean. You can see every single muscle fiber. Like they're so sinewy. All they do is run. That's all they do. But they have to run in order to continue looking like that. Like most of these people are doing 70, 80, 90, 100 plus miles a week. All like running is their job. Cardio is their job, and it's not a good long-term solution. It upregulates your hunger hormones. It increases production of cortisol, which will actually reduce lean tissue mass. It's not a good long-term solution. Whereas weight training, resistance training, you can still produce a calorie deficit. Both of them are useful for producing a calorie deficit. If your goal is to lose fat or to lose weight, you have to be in a calorie deficit. You can do that by doing just one or the other, just strength training or just cardio, or you can combine the two. Mm-hmm. For a lot of people, that's useful to create a little bit more of a calorie deficit with some low intensity cardio. But if I'm working with someone who just wants to alter body comp, why would we make you more hungry by having you do cardio if I'm trying to put you in a calorie deficit but make you not feel starving all the time? So strength and conditioning or strength training, in my opinion, it's the best long-term solution. Although like we're just looking at body comp changes. We're not looking at like cardiorespiratory health and longevity. Mm-hmm. Like you want to live a long time, you need to do cardio. You want to look better, strength and conditioning, strength training. So it's, do both.
No, I hear you.
A little bit of both.
And it's funny, like when I prepared the outline for this, I know, so we talked about it then, that means very briefly. I think that a lot of people kind of gravitate towards running because they look at it as something that's easy. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, like, is that why? Or is it still the old homage of, like, get on the cardio, wagon from the 80s and throw on the spandex and, that's what's going to keep you thin? I would hope that they do it because it's easy. Like, for me, I like running because I love the way I feel while I'm in the midst of the run. Mm-hmm. And for me, I look at it as less of a chance that I'm going to pop my bicep tendon or throw my back out doing a deadlift.
Sure.
Even though I can tell you all the same, I can throw my back out picking something up after my run, assuming I'm not taking care of myself.
Yeah.
But I mean, do you think that people are running because they think it's easy? Do you think they're running because it's like such a cultural thing? And then by that, I mean doing themselves a disservice in terms of body comp?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So like the barrier to entry, like just about anyone can run. Yeah. Like if you can go buy some running shoes, like you can hit a running trail or you can hit the roads or you can go to a park. Like just about anybody can get out and do it. And the assumption is if you can walk, like no one has to teach you how to walk. Like you learn how to walk when you're a kid, but nobody's like showing you how to do it, right? They're not saying, hey, put your foot right here and then do this. And then like it's the same with the idea is it's the same with running. Like running, in my opinion, is a very complex skill. The same way that squatting, deadlifting, or Olympic lifts are complex skills. Like they're very, like you can adjust and manage technique and you can get different outcomes. So, but in general, the barrier to entry for running is super low and just about anyone can do it. And I love that. And that's great. And like, especially here in Dallas, like the way we met was via Run On, right? And so every Wednesday night they do their social run and everybody shows up and, like at least people are out doing some exercise.
Yeah.
In an ideal world, everyone would do, strength training and some cardio, are you hurting your potential summer bod by running? Probably not, but but you're going to get more bang for your buck from the strength training. But yeah, I mean, it's viewed as easy because just about anybody can do it, and you can join a running club. And I think like you can't gloss over like the psychological benefit of walking or jogging or running. Like, it's huge, especially during a pandemic. Like, I think people getting out and doing some running has been huge for people's mental health. And like, I wouldn't be doing the mileage I'm doing now if I hadn't started running, you know, with the Run On group a year ago, and then getting some runs in on the weekends every once in a while with Elliot, and then you know, also coaching, you know, my high school homeschool team as well. But yeah, like it's great that just about anybody can do it. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's a net positive for health and body comp, probably.
Understood. I got you, man. I know, and you know what? If you are going to do running, or especially if you think like I think, or you do like I do, you know, just make sure you're doing some calisthenics. Get your push-ups in. Try to do some pull-ups if you can.
Yeah.
Right.
Another really, really easy way to ensure that you're doing your body comp a favor is don't just do steady state all the time. Like, yeah, that zone 1 and 2, like that's really important. But if you want to increase muscle mass, like do some sprints, and like that's relative. So you don't have to go to a track and do 10 times 100 meters with walking recovery. Like maybe you're just going to throw some strides into the middle of your run where you're just changing your pace. Like doing things like that where you're recruiting more bigger motor units or like fast twitch motor unit fibers, like that's going to help. That's going to be really beneficial for body comp too. So I know a lot of people who to prep for the summer to get their beach bod ready, like they shift away from like steady state cardio and they just do some high intensity cardio, and like they get great results from that. So throw some speed in there.
Now, did I hear you were telling me one time that somebody brings you donuts every Friday morning? Like a particular client brings you donuts every Friday? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I had 2 this morning.
What's your favorite donut?
Oh, so shout out to Andy, hooking me up with donuts every Friday. So quick story about that. Andy broke his neck in Spain doing some bike riding. And when he came back, you know, he's in a neck brace and couldn't come to me. Obviously, like he can't drive. He was very, very limited on what he was allowed to do for about 12 weeks. So as soon as he was cleared, I would go, you know, I'd go to his house and we started working on arch mechanics and balance and doing the things that he would, you know, that the doctor said, hey, yeah, that's fine. You can do that. We weren't allowed to squat. We weren't allowed to hip hinge. So we were doing things that we could do. And I would drive past this donut shop, and twice a week I'd go, you know, to his house. And so at least once a week I'd be like, pick up some donuts. And so I'd take him to his house just to, you know, just to try to make it fun, you know, a little more fun. Because there were a lot of times where that was brutal. Like he was in pain all the time, and, you know, was stuck in a neck brace. And I think that helped. And then as soon as he was cleared to, you know, to be out of the neck brace and to come back to my office, like every Friday, you just show up. So my favorite donut, oh man. Okay. So is it, what's the place on the east side of White Rock Lake? I can't remember the name of the donut shop now. I feel awful. Anyway, they've got a donut called the Canadian Healthcare, and it's a maple long john with a strip of bacon on it and then maple syrup on top. And that's like maple glazed donuts are, in my opinion, one of the best. And then Andy sometimes brings me a cronut, which is a croissant donut hybrid. And there's usually like strawberries and whipped cream on it. Oh, it's amazing.
Have you been, because I'm going to get ice cream tonight. That's
nice.
I'm getting ideas now. What about, oh man, Sweet Days over there in Richardson? Have you been?
Mm-mm.
Really?
I've not, but I'm gonna do it now.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Well, they've got, it's like a birthday cake one. They've got like a snickerdoodle, Reese's peanut butter cup one. And then they have it's Oreo topping, but I wasn't sure. Well, and they'll heat them up right there. And it's like small batch. So it's not like, Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah.
Like it's until it runs out. But they have very unique flavors, and the toppings are very reliably, like if you wanted birthday cake or some kind of frosting, like that's like around the glaze. You know what
Nice.
I mean? Okay. The Bavarian cream is where I was going with that one. I don't think they have a Bavarian cream, but like that's like, because I used to be like before I was the keto guy, and definitely within the last couple of months, like I might have alluded to with you in the podcast, or I certainly was telling Kat on the last podcast that we did a month ago here. I mean, my eating's out of control right now. So yeah, donuts, freaking cake, ice cream over at Baltellini's Gelato, if I'm even saying that right. And now I know I have to go to Sweet Firefly. You know what I'm talking about? Also in Richardson. So yeah, man, I got my work cut out for me.
Same.
But the donuts, like, yeah, dude, it's like all I wanted. And that's the whole reason this even started was last Sunday and Monday, I did like 3 miles back to back. I felt great. Everything was going good. That second night, I was like, I am starving because I'd been in a caloric deficit for like 2 weeks prior. Well, it was like on purpose, eating clean. I had just gotten over some like ridiculous parasite. Something got a hold of me. Antibiotics took care of it. Thank God for Western medicine in that regard.
Yes, sir.
And I was like feeling like myself and everything was going good. By that second night, I probably ate like, 2,000 to 3,000 calories alone. By the next day, I was like, I'm all screwed up again. Blood sugar fluctuations. And it's like, and then it was like, am I going to go run today? I'm not going to go run today.
Access now.
Yeah. And now here we are. It's like, all I want is ice cream, donuts, my body to recover. I got to go activate my glutes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're going to do some planking, going to do some tracking.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work, man. But start incrementally. Just, put the pieces together slowly. Baby steps.
Yeah. It's like lessons in life, baby steps, start slow, keep a journal, have an accountability partner. Man, we can go on and on with that. Now, I'm going to quickly peek at my sheet and make sure.
Speaking of accountability, shameless plug. If you need accountability, you can pay me and I will keep you accountable. I provide that as a nutrition coaching service.
Yes.
So. Just saying.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, where can people find you on social media? Keep tabs. Reach you.
Instagram, Twitter, at Athlete Factors.
2 words. Or is it 1 word?
It's all smushed together online. But or you can go to athletefactors.com. Okay. Or you can search Athlete Factors on Facebook. Basically everywhere. Yeah.
Cool. I mean, now, and honestly, like I say this again for the people, if you didn't listen to, or if this podcast was too long and you skipped around or you're watching a clip, this guy's podcast, Athlete Factors podcast, is phenomenal because the guests he has, it's such a great variety. They're experts in the field. There's golden nuggets galore. You guys got to tune in.
I really appreciate that, man.
Yeah, no, really, dude. I really like when I knew you kind of like had the podcast. And then it was that's right, like the pollen one, and I've already forgotten. I'm sorry, his name. We talked about allergies. That was the one that like I was like, wow, this is some just amazing content. And then I went back and started listening to some more, and I listened to some more, and I listened to some more. And in the last few weeks, I've probably listened to about 6 of your podcasts.
Awesome.
I really appreciate it. Man, I was like, I can't even believe an hour and 47 minutes has gone on now because there's like, it's like I want to talk about more, but now I feel like I'd be going back. So we'll just have to like do it again.
Hey, let's do it again.
Whether it's on your channel or mine.
Sure, both.
And yeah, man, I was like, well, they know where to find you. I hope you enjoyed the Toco Chico. I mean, for doing 30 some miles a week, I mean, you needed like 6 of those.
You got to be hydrated, man. Yeah. It's warm out now in Texas, so.
Incredible. Isn't it just like, is it just me? And I've lived here probably like a year less than you or something, but is it just disgustingly hot right now for Texas? It seems like it's more humid.
I don't know. It always feels awful during the summer.
that or now that I'm out of nutritional ketosis, I'm not cold. I'm not cold all the time, so I'm like everyone else who just hates the Texas heat. I used to be like, it doesn't bother me. I like it when it's 100 degrees.
That's hilarious.
It was also like 4% body fat. No, that's exaggeration.
You're going to be cold.
Sorry, it's 6. Yeah.
That, and you weren't eating too much protein because that would increase digestive thermogenesis. So,
Yes.
yeah, the meat sweats. It's a real thing.
Damn.
So don't go over on the meat.
See, this is where I have to say, that's where like Paul Saladino in the Carnivore Code, you ruined me. It's a real thing. And I still love you. He's a genius. I love listening to him. He's right about almost everything. But good God, when I started replacing those plant-based type of ideals and getting still all the right fats with more like animal-based fat, oh yeah, no, it's been a hard struggle for me. I did it all the wrong way, and I'm suffering the consequences. Texas sweats.
That's it, man. No. It's rough here.
The protein sweats.
Protein sweats.
Just like, now I got to edit that.
Oh, well.
Right. Well, guys, thanks for tuning in for the last 2 hours. Everything that you need to know about Kevin, his books, podcast notes will be in the description below on YouTube. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, everything and anything you ever need here on the Dr. Pearlman TV channel. Oh no, until next time, thank you all for tuning in. It's me and Matthew Fox saying, till next time.
Adios.
All right, everyone, thanks for tuning in today. You'd be doing us a great